Greetings, everybody. Welcome to another session of Peace Engineering Echo Collaboratives. Today we have a very interesting topic on project scope and humanitarian finance. So for everybody, this session will be recorded and posted on a website so people can watch it at their leisure. Please type your name, email, and affiliation in the chat so we can follow up with you. Or if you have any questions, we can communicate with you. If you're not speaking, please make sure your microphone is muted. We will have a Q&A session, question and answer session right after the presentations. We will be monitoring the chat and we will communicate with you when it comes to the Q&A session. So I think we can get started. This is something that just came up. There was a great speech by the United Nations Secretary General, but he says that we must make peace with nature. It's a call to action. Next, please. So just a pitch on what is peace engineering. This is something that you can read, but it's the intentional application of science and technology principles for transdisciplinary systemic level thinking to build and support conditions for peace. Next, please. This is the topic for today's collaborative, project scope and humanitarian financing. I have great pleasure to introduce two outstanding speakers, Rossana Jordan. She has been working on the field for about 30 years in conflict areas, conflict regions around the world, Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo. She's been in Sri Lanka, Haiti, all over the world, helping build infrastructure that is greatly needed today, especially now that we need the infrastructure because we have a great challenge right now on vaccines and vaccination. She has expertise of working with the United Nations Office of Project Services from project management, procurement at international levels. So she'll be talking about project scoping and creating your own project proposal. And then we have a great guest, Richard Harris from Canada, who's a strategist, technologist, and an international, a global citizen focusing on impacting strategies for the world. He will present to us on how humanitarian aid can be accessed. Thank you, both of you, and we can get started. Rossana?
Thank you. So yes, I am, as Ramiro said, I'm a humanitarian practitioner and I've mainly worked over 30 years with one of the UN agencies, UNOPS, and as a head of support services, which is in essence an operations management profile, I have worked in the field, and what UNOPS mainly does is infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure, especially in conflict areas. And that's one of the pillars of UNOPS. The other two pillars is project management and international procurement. Okay, so let's get started. I will share my screen. So we'll start with project scoping. I came up with 6 basic steps for this presentation, and we'll start with the first one. The first one would be to identify your key stakeholders and beneficiaries, explain the project to key stakeholders, define goals, and get the initial buy-in. So when you identify your key stakeholders, that could be, government level, that could be at the local authority level, could be private or public institutions, local international organizations. That includes your beneficiaries and the funding source. So in essence, you would explain what is your project about and why. Why do you want to execute this project? So you need to determine the value of your project. The first thing would be to discuss the needs of the stakeholders and the beneficiaries. What are their expectations? That would be one of the purpose of your project. Once done, you would establish baselines for project scope, a budget, a timeline to help you measure key conditions. That would be when you set up indicators prior to project startup that will later help you monitor and evaluate your project's progress. This will help you measure project success. Determine your resources for your project, the location, facilities, equipment, human resources, etc. All in all, this is a solid base for your project work plan. Excuse me. The second step would be to list out your goals. Outline the project. Align your objectives and key results. Sometimes they're called OKRs. So make sure your goals are clear. This is critical so your key stakeholders have a clear understanding of what your goals are. In essence, your key stakeholders must be satisfied with the project because one of them will be the funding source. And so you need to make sure that they are satisfied, that you meet their expectations. Project planning. Build the structure of your project, set up your deliverables and milestones and the tasks that take to reach those goals. The milestones may define the check-in points throughout your project so that all stakeholders understand the progress that is taking place and what the expectations are when they will be measured. Next step would be to align your objectives and key results by setting up a management framework to set your goals and identify measurable metrics to track your team's progress toward achieving these goals. Remember that everything you do, all the tasks, your deliverables, milestones, they must be measurable. You have to have a system to measure it, to quantify every step of the way of your project. This is very important. Step 3. Next thing would be obviously to prepare a project schedule, your timeline. So once a project scope is outlined in terms of goals, tasks, deliverables, and milestones, make sure you prepare a timeline, a project schedule. And one of the tools that you could use is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is a Gantt chart. It is a very practical tool to set up a schedule. It helps to easily visualize your project timeline by providing a complete view of your project's progress and work scope and outstanding tasks, deliverables that still need to be completed. Now, one tip that I always give is to make sure that when you are preparing this, your Gantt chart, make sure you add some additional time to each task and deliverable. This will help you avoid any unexpected bottlenecks, because at the end, if you have any bottlenecks, this could really affect your timeline and ultimately your budget. Here is just a sample of a Gantt chart. So you will see here you have the description of the tasks and deliverables. You have the duration of how long it's going to take to carry out each task. You have a start date. And here is when you start measuring how long it's taking you to deliver every task and your deliverables. You may wish to add other columns such as comments and indicate if you're having to deal with any obstacles. So this is really, really helpful and measurable. The next chart that you would need to have is for your roles, responsibilities, and resources is what some call a RACI chart or matrix, which stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So it shows the role of each team player, whether the person's responsible, whether the person's accountable, or needs to be consulted for any task or informed. So this chart will help you to determine who will do what for your project, in essence, and it clearly establishes the roles and responsibilities of each team member. Make sure that when assigning tasks to your team members, clarify the responsibilities and expectations of each individual to help minimize stress levels. You don't want to overlap tasks between two team members, right? Because this will increase the stress level. So this chart will really help you visualize the roles and responsibilities of each team member. So, if you can go out online and you will find different types of templates. This is just one of them. And here is a quick sample of an RACI chart. So you have here are the columns, the roles of each individual, each team member, and you have the deliverables. So you clearly can, fill out this chart by pointing what is the level of responsibility or role of each individual. Moving forward to step 5, we have what is called the communication line and the check-in process. So before you even start a project, one thing that is very important is to have what is called a collaboration tool, or which is in essence a software. You need to have a software. You can no longer work with the email system and Excel sheets and other templates. You need to have one software where you can house all your project pieces all in one location. And this is very critical because this allows all team members to have access to all the information in real time. Is the best way of tracking all the information, of updating the information and editing, where everybody can reach out to the same pool of information and everybody's in line with the same information in real time. So some of the pieces that you can include would be calendar management, contact management, the list of all your contacts, both within your team, and also this obviously includes your stakeholders. The document management, that's where you store all the documentation as you go along with your project. Project management, now this is an entire array of tasks and it's a different management framework. It includes a whole array of elements in order to properly manage a project. This is where you would include your budget. This is where you include change management. This is where you include, it's a whole array of tasks. And another one is the task management. That could be just specifically for managing your tasks. You also have the risk management. There's always risks and constraints in each project. So here's where this will allow you to manage every single obstacle or challenge that you may reach during the project execution. Like I said, this is a very important tool to track your progress, to share the updates and make any edits. It's important also to define how every team member should communicate throughout their project and keep the communication line in one tool so everyone can access to the same information. This is also, the communication line is also very critical. This helps you to avoid any type of misunderstanding, any level of misunderstandings. So the next tip, my tip would be to, in order to have a sound communication, well, this is key to success, to a successful project. And this is something that I've experienced over the years. By not having a proper tool of a communication line, this could be within your project with your team members or with the key stakeholders and beneficiaries. I mean, you could risk creating misunderstandings, and this could result to even delays in delivering your project, and unfortunately even failures. This can happen. This can happen because you want to make sure you build trust with your key stakeholders, and as a project manager, also you need to build trust with your team. So having a proper communication line is very, very important. Excuse me. Go to the next step. The next step is when you're almost ready to launch your project. Here are the last steps you would need to undertake. So make sure you discuss with your team that everybody is on the same page. And although it may seem like trivial, make sure you discuss if any upcoming holidays, vacation, any issues with stakeholders or vendors that may be involved in your project, because this is very critical. You don't want to have any surprises when you're ready to kick off your project. Okay, so it's important to, in essence, to communicate with your team members. So again, set up a clear chain of command within your team, and also discuss with your team any potential risks. Your team must be prepared to be able to tackle all the risks, and you do it as a team. And this will help you tackle any risks that you may have during the course of the project. And this will help you to prepare even a proper monitoring tool to manage your risks. So have a clear agenda when you're ready to meet with the stakeholders. And of course, you will be meeting off and on with your key stakeholders prior to launching your project. But once you think you're at the final stage, you have all your tools, everything in place, you've had all the discussions with your key stakeholders, make sure you have a clear agenda. So that, again, you need to make sure that everybody, every team member, your key stakeholders are on the same page with regard to your goals, the roles, the process, the timeline, the cost estimates, financial and progress reports. You will have to prepare periodically and submit to your key stakeholders. The payment terms. By then, you must have already discussed the payment terms to the funding source. Now, the funding source, it could be, you'd have, if you're working with the government, if the government is your key stakeholder, that doesn't mean that the government will be financing the entire project. So you may have multiple key stakeholders who will be the funding source. So make sure you discuss all this and have everything outlined, and it's loud and clear and for everybody. And so once you're done, then you would be ready then to start with the next step, which would be to make sure you have you present the clear agenda to your key stakeholders. So one, again, we'll just go over review, is again the definition of project goals and objectives and the value they bring to beneficiaries. What is the value added here of your project? How is this going to benefit your beneficiaries? List all the assets the project is expected to deliver. That could be infrastructure, equipment, facilities, or all of that. Connection between stakeholders, requirements, and the project deliverable. And project deliverables is also important. Make sure that to show the key stakeholders that their requirements are all factored in and taken into account. So there's, again, make sure there are no misunderstandings here. Project timeline, make sure that you have a proper timeline so all parties fully understand all the tasks, deliverables, and milestones to be completed within the established deadlines. Description of roles and responsibilities, including reporting line of team members. the RACI chart. Make sure you have a sound budget. This ensures that all resources, equipment, tasks, and deliverables are duly quantified and costed out. Make sure to factor in contingencies in your budget. Usually, UNOPS, like all these infrastructure projects, for example, we always added like a 10% because you always have contingencies in a project. And last but not least, the description of the communication tool. Make sure you explain to all partners how you're going to manage this this project, because you need to, again, your key stakeholders need to see how you're going to manage this project. They need to be satisfied with all the tools that you're going to use in order to implement your project. All right. So we'll go to the second part, which is the project proposal write-up. And some people call this document a project scope document. It's also called a statement of work. So make sure that you align all your tasks and goals and everything to have a buy-in for the stakeholders. So what is a project scope document? As I said, it's often called a statement of work. It outlines all the work required to deliver a project. It describes requirements that stakeholders expect from a project. It includes all your deliverables, milestones, and deadlines, all tasks that lead to deliverables and who those tasks are assigned to. It defines all resources required for project implementation. And here, when you talk about resources, whatever you're budgeted, if this is an infrastructure project, for example, you're obviously going to need to hire the services of vendors, contractors. So your project will probably be responsible for conducting procurement processes. Otherwise, you may consider in your project outsourcing the bidding process. So this could result in an international and local procurement processes. So this is something important to consider. Again, make sure you have all your project costs, a proper budget and timeline, and you establish the governance process of the project. So you have the proper reporting line, the chain of command, and the terms of payment to the funding source. Now, who writes the project scope document? So in essence, it's the project manager. He or she is the best one in the best position to bring together all the inputs, needs, wants, and views of all the stakeholders, including beneficiaries and subject matter experts. Knowing how to write a project scope document is critical for the success of our project. This is critical, like I said, because if you need to make sure that you have included all the elements in your project as described earlier. So it's holistic and it's very clear what the project is for and why you want to do it. So the project requirement should not expand beyond your budget and schedule. Be mindful that anything that is not in the project scope document is out of scope. So if it's out of scope, it will not be taken into consideration unless there is a need that key stakeholders, decide, yes, it is necessary to include anything that may be out of scope. So it depends on the key stakeholders if they wish to include it in the project. Now, make sure the document is something that you need to be mindful is, and it's important that your project scope document serves as a record of what was agreed to. This avoids any confusion and or misunderstandings among stakeholders throughout project implementation. So it's a record, and it's which, eventually becomes an agreement between all parties. The project document is the project manager's and team's protection from over or under delivering. It helps to keep everyone, stakeholders, project manager, and project team members on the same page. So this is something that I cannot highlight enough the importance of this document. It has to be well-rounded and contain all the elements already mentioned. So when you create a project scope document, I've outlined here key sections here that are important to include in your template. So you start out with your business case, and this provides the background of your project. Why? The purpose of your project and end goals you wish to achieve. Project deliverables, description of all deliverables and milestones, including timeline and cost estimates. Acceptance criteria, key stakeholders' requirements, list of criteria that deliverables must meet for key stakeholders to accept them. Constraints, you'll always have constraints. So you list any potential constraints on your project. It could be time, money, resources, weather conditions, etc. Assumptions, anything you still must guess at during the outset of the project should be stated as an assumption. Another element that is important is a feasibility study. You may be aware of what it is. So this is something you may consider conducting prior to launching your project. And some key stakeholders, most of them will actually require a feasibility study. The same as the next one, the environmental impact study. This is important to also include in your project scope document, what way your project may affect the environment. And the last one is the project sustainability plan. Now this describes how your project will be sustained in the long run to still function. And this is, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of a sustainability plan. You need to show your stakeholders how the sustainability of your project. Nowadays, all projects should be sustainable. Otherwise, if they're not sustainable, they can end up being a big white elephant. So this is very important to show and describe how sustainable your project is. So last but not least, I'd like to say, the beneficiaries, they are also your stakeholders. And one thing that is important, and based on experience, is make sure if you're doing humanitarian projects to engage the beneficiaries, engage the communities, engage them. We've a past experience, the projects we've had, for example, in Afghanistan and Sri Lanka, in Haiti and other countries. For example, the construction of roads that we did, we engaged the communities, we organized them. It's what we call community-based organizations. We organized them so that we trained them in such a way that they were the ones responsible for building the roads. And what was so gratifying to see in that experience was that most of the workers were actually women. And so this is an amazing way to empower women, and they take ownership of the project. It's something very important to not just engage the beneficiaries, but make them feel that they own the project. And also you have, as you are, executing a project, you will have success stories in your project, like side stories, where you have, like we had a project in Haiti where during the aftermath of the hurricane, we were building semi-permanent homes. And so we train youngsters over 18 years of age who were basically obviously not employed. They didn't have any, they were out on the streets. all day. So we engaged them and we trained them, and we were able to give them a skill set, a new skill set, and they were so proud of what they did. So they built these dwellings in one day, one dwelling a day. We built more than 4,000 dwellings for those that had lost their homes during the earthquake in Haiti back in 2010. Moving on, lessons learned. This is something also important that not all projects have, and this is something I highly recommend as a project manager. Part of your project management tool is to have a lessons learned session when this is during the closeout of your project, when your project is almost completed, and to discuss what are the lessons that you learned during the process. What were the positive and negative lessons? Because if you are going to implement a similar project in the future, you will have this information available, and so you won't repeat the same, mistakes maybe, or you will be aware of the challenges or obstacles that you had to deal with. So this is something that you really want to have at the end of your project when you're ready to complete your project. Again, make sure your project is holistic, it's sustainable, and that if you're doing an infrastructure project, make sure it's a turnkey project because you're not only going to build an infrastructure, say you're going to build a maternity ward or hospital or a health center. You need to also be aware of the location, whether there are access roads to the site, where there all the medical equipment that you would need for the infrastructure, the furniture, clean water, sewage system, electricity. If you don't have electricity, you would have to have generators. Need to have obviously IT connectivity, etc. So make sure your projects are holistic. You're not leaving anything out. So yeah, this is something also very important to bear in mind. And on that note, thank you again for attending the session, and I'll be available for any questions at the end of this presentation.
Thank you, Rossana. Next, we're going to invite Rick Harris. He's going to talk on humanitarian non-debt financing. Rick, thank you for being with us. Microphone is yours.
Thanks, Ramiro. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Rossana. That was great. That's a great, perfect segue into what I'm going to be talking about. And as Rossana mentioned, the what and the why are really key. Funding organizations are not there just to say, okay, we'll give you money or make money. What they're really looking for is the EPC or the developer and the country aligned? Are they fully aware of what the projects are? Have they thought through the project? Or is it a real wish or a hope? And so what I'm going to talk about today is humanitarian funding. A little bit about my background. I'm a technologist, been involved in green technologies for the last 25 years, been able to travel around the world and look at different technologies and help countries and clients find the right technologies for the right application, whether it be farming, whether it be house construction, whether it be hydroponics, whether it be anything to do with converting, water cleaning, garbage, dealing with waste, human waste, animal waste. And so fortunate, I've met a lot of people globally, and I see some of my friends on the call today. And so what I want to talk about is this humanitarian funding. Now, you guys are educators and engineers, so you're going to be aware of a lot of projects that come up within your country. And one of the biggest challenges with projects is a lot of projects are really well thought through, but there's no funding source attached to it. And if there's funding, it's typically a debt financing. And if you look around the world today, COVID hasn't helped, but it's sure impacted everybody. Virtually every country around the world is just ridden with debt. So there's little or no opportunity for them to go out and really start to develop or continue to develop or develop further, because it just puts them further and further in debt. So that's handcuffed a lot of countries. So what I want to talk about is what Impact Strategies does is we basically are a pre-qualifier for a very, very sophisticated and solid and reliable funding source. Now, imagine if you were a funding source that had billions of dollars, you'd probably get a couple of million emails a day. So what Impact Strategies, what we do, our team does, is we evaluate projects. So if you guys have projects, as Ramiro has done, if you have projects, just shoot those information to us, the why and the what. We'll evaluate them, and if they meet their criteria, then we'll pass them on your behalf to the funding source. So let me just talk a little bit about this. The funding source, over the last 45 years, I've been doing a lot of different international business. And I myself and my companies and my associates, we've used a ton of different funding sources, from going public to venture capital to banking to debt financing to a variety of different funding sources. And some of them are good and some of them are really lopsided. And when I say lopsided, they mean that it's for the benefit of the funder. So if you look around the globe, there's a lot of countries out there that are basically going in and trying to buy up all the assets, whether it be assets in the ground or assets above ground of different countries, and really handcuffing those countries so that now they're basically owned by a foreigner. And so one of the things that this group did is they said, we want to try and stop that. We want to try and provide non-debt, non-recourse financing for countries that need, and originally started with third and fourth world countries and saying, we want to go out there and help these guys. So last year, or sorry, about a year and a half ago, they put together a $100 billion fund, and they've allocated 60 billion, and they've got another 40 billion to allocate in the next 6 months. And then they've got another 300 billion that they're putting aside to fund projects globally. So let me just go through quickly what it is. Now, Donna, thanks for putting that up. So, excuse me. What they look for, the criteria they look for, it has to do something, and as Rossana talked about, is it has to be environmentally impacting. It has to impact people. It has to be some sort of a project that has, it's holistic in its intent and its project size, but it has to really create jobs, training, impact people, stimulate economies, and it must have a return on investment vehicle attached to it. It must have some sort of revenue that's generated. It is not, they will not invest in countries that have political or banking unrest. And we all know that some countries will go in and out of favor depending on it. And so they have a real good analytic team that analyzes the country's banking relationships and the country's political stability prior to them saying yes or no if they want to go forward. Project size is typically around $150 million. Now, having said that, there are some exceptions because they've come up, they realize that some of the countries don't have projects that are that big, but start with projects that are, you know, tens of millions of dollars. So they do have a way of funding those, but it's done on a consultative manner. What they'll do is once we analyze the project and present the project to them, they'll come back and they'll say, okay, this project for $40 million, we want to talk to the government officials involved in the developer. So they'll set up a Zoom call, they'll meet with the developers, et cetera, and then they'll go through the project and then they'll say, okay, this project fits with what we're trying to do with this funding source. So keep in mind, the 150 million is flexible to a certain degree. Each project has to have a federal or state level government support. And what I mean by that is the government must understand what the project is. They must then understand the expectations of the project, the impact of the project, the cost of the project, and we want to make sure that the government is behind that project. They'll support it. They won't just allow the project to start and then all of a sudden go, nope, time out, we're going to stop this project. So there has to be government support. And I put in the word non-recourse in there because part of that government support is some sort of a document stating that they support the project, and we'll get into that in a little bit further length, but it's a non-recourse document that just basically says, government, we understand the project and we're going to support you. It's a non-debt funding mechanism. And what that means is it does not show up on the books as a debt. So it's something that is outside of general accounting, and it's a non-debt structure, and they'll get into that a little bit more. 60% at the end of the project, 60% of that project is gifted back to the developer and the country. So if it's a $100 million project, $60 million of that project, whether it be housing, education, hospital, or whatever, is gifted back to the country, and the 40% is retained by the financing company. Now that's their sort of commitment from the developer side. And what they will do is they will allow that project, that 40%, to be purchased over time by the country or the developer. So at the end of when all the dust settles, that project could be 100% owned by that developer and or country. So it's going to benefit. So if you have a project in, as Rossana was saying, in, let's say Haiti or wherever, that project could be owned 100% by the Haitians. Now, I saw a couple of comments that said I'm not being very clear, and I apologize. I'm going to go through some more. And once the project is accepted and the documentation has been presented, it's 6 to 8 weeks for financing. So it's very, very quick. And that's what I like about these guys. They work very quickly. Now, you can imagine being a humanitarian funding source, they are very, very busy. So we need to pre-qualify it. And then once it gets into their analytic side, they're about 6 to 8 weeks before they can move forward. Donna, would you mind going to the next part? Yeah. So here's the project funding procedures. There needs to be a document created, what's called the letter of request. Because this funding is coming from top tier banks, they need to have a funding letter of request. That basically just means, in my case, I may say, Richard Harris, I'm dealing with the ministers of finance in Canada. We would like to find out more about your project. Can we set up a time to talk? So it's really just something giving them permission to give you information, because the banking regulations state that banks, top tier banks, are not supposed to go out and actually market their products or their services. So that's why we do pre-qualifications of projects. We present it, and if that project's accepted, then bank to bank, government and bank, start talking directly. Document review. So I'll leave this to you guys to look at. You are all sent a copy of this, but really the document review, that's our job, is to make sure that we help you get your documents in order. And Rossana really did a very good job of sort of bringing some clarity to what you really need to be able to present. Yes, we show a list of documents, but it's not just, give us a one-page executive summary and then give us, a handwritten Excel spreadsheet and expect to get funded. The funders are looking for the experience of the management team, the project size and scope and impact on people and the environment, and then the costs of the project, and then what's that project going to do and how does that project going to generate revenue. So that's really what our job is just to help you get that documentation. So that sort of stuff we can help you with. If you go to the next page, please, Donna. So I put an example of what that letter of request would be. And again, you can read this on your own, but we need to know who in the government you're talking to. It's not just, gee, it's Rick Harris here and I've got a project, I want to build, 5,000 homes for veterans in the United States. Great project, good idea. Show us the documentation, show us your Gantt chart, show us your responsibility, show us your team, give us some impact on your experience as a construction builder, etc. So that's sort of what we're looking for in the documentation. But this, you need to have government contacts. You need to know, we need to know that you've spent the time and you've contacted the government and they're on side. Next page, please. So the funding source, we can go down, just keep going down a bit. You guys can read through this because the government support's really key. But the government non-recourse document, let me spend a couple of minutes on that. That's really important because a project, money, nobody's going to give you $150 million without knowing that the government's on side and the government's supportive of it. Now, the government must put up some sort of a skin in the game, some sort of a non-recourse asset. Now that can come by the way of a standby letter of credit. It can come by a government bond that the funders will actually help the government issue and actually subscribe completely to it. It could be funds held in the country's bank, or it could be some sort of sovereign guarantee or some sort of other guarantee that the government can provide that's acceptable by the funders. But that's important. That document, whatever that happens to be, gets held in a trust company, and the only people who have access to it are the government and the funders. And then at the end of the project, that document is now passed back to the government, unencumbered, with no liens whatsoever. So the idea behind it is the government knows the project, the government has put some skin in the game through some sort of an asset and documentation. And then at the end of that project, that documentation is turned back, and that government is given a 60% ownership in whatever that project is. Now, let me just sort of step back for a second. If I have $100 million project and it's not costing me anything to put that project into my country to support the people in the city and create jobs, etc. And at the end of that project, if I follow the steps properly, at the end of that project, I get 60% ownership in that project. And I'm now the partner that's holding 40% is a funding source. Just think of that relationship. Now, all of a sudden, I have a funding source that I can go back to and say, we have another project. We want to do this. And once you create a track record with these funders, you've got a relationship that will give you the ability to continue to further develop your country. And that's really critical. All right. So it's not just a one-time. If everything goes properly and it's very successful, then you've got a financing partner for life. So that's something just to keep in mind. So Donna, do you mind going down a bit? So I talk about non-recourse. I just put a definition in here for you. And then I talked about non-debt. So you can just move forward on that, Donna. So here's the criteria. Now, Rossana talked about it, and this does not all have to happen at once. The first part, in order to engage them into a conversation with the developer. So if you're the developer and you've got a ministerial contact, you too would be getting involved into a conversation with the funders once you've provided the letter of request and an executive summary. So those are the key things that I'll help you set up with. And then the rest of this documentation, I can help you organize it. We have copies of other stuff that we can share with you, and we can help you organize this. Once that documentation is presented, then the funders will say, okay, we like this project, we're going to sign off on it. You'll get a term sheet from them, and then probably a couple of weeks later, you'll be able to do your first draw based on your drawdown schedule. If you don't mind moving up a little. Thanks, Donna. Okay, so that's fine. So now we're at the end. So this just sort of talks a little bit about what we do and who we are. But in summary, the key thing is the letter of request. It's a simple one-page document, and with that, I'd like to see an executive summary that just talks about as Rossana mentioned, the what and the why, and then some sort of a overview pro forma, if possible, that says if we build, like for example, we're talking with a group in Australia, they're building 50,000 homes. So phase one is going to be 10,000 homes. So they've been able to put together a visual using Google Earth of where that property is going to be. They have some architectural designs. So we help them put all that information together and presented it to the group. So that's really what we do. So it's non-debt, non-recourse financing for projects that impact humanity, people, stimulate the economy, help the environment. So I can help you, I very quickly can tell you whether or not that project will fit. We want to deal with countries that have stable banking and stable political situations. So again, I've had, like Vincent's reached out to me and we're talking about an educational project there. So everything revolves around those 2 or 3 key things. And if everything fits there, then I can help you move forward to the next level. The Zoom call, there will be a Zoom call set up between the minister, the government official, the developer, and the funding source. Once they get the letter of request, once they get the executive summary, and once they've said, yes, we will, let's move forward with this project. Yes, it fits with our criteria and the country's stable enough to talk to. So that's really all I wanted to talk to you guys about. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a funding source out there that's willing to help. All we need to do is make sure it fits with their criteria and we present the information properly. And hopefully I haven't confused everybody, but you can always email me and ask questions. I'll answer them as quickly as possible. And now I think, Ramiro, we're going into a Q&A where people can ask questions.
Thank you, Rick. Yes, we're going to start the Q&A session. In theory, we have about only 10 minutes, but we can exceed the hour if there's more questions and start a dialogue. There's a couple of questions in the chat, Rick. They want to know, well, it wasn't very clear. I don't know. I think you explained a lot. There's a question on how your company is funded. There's also information on where the funds come from or what.
Okay. Okay, thank you. My company is, we're just helping them. We get paid by them. We're just helping them bring projects to the table that meet their criteria. We're a pre-screening, if you will. And so that's how we get funded, but we're not the funding source. We are just an evaluative source that helps them out. The funding comes from a line of credit. Right now it's $100 billion line of credit from the World Bank, or one of the top tier banks. The funding group have got a variety of sources that they pull together into this massive amount of funding, but it's all done through top tier banking and it's all registered, et cetera. It's all, totally above board. And as I said, in 45 years, I've used different types of funding sources, and these guys are the most reputable and probably the most efficient I've ever met. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Other questions, please? There's another question here. What rate of return or payback period are you looking for?
Okay, there is zero interest. Again, this is non-debt. This is the humanitarian funding. At the end of the project, you get gifted 60% of that project for free, no cost. If you choose to buy the 40% retained by the financing group, you can buy it spread over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever, with no interest associated.
Thank you. There's a question on your assistants to help put documents together. So they should contact, so let me stop here. So if you want to reach out and find out more about finance, please contact Rick directly. He will help you with the finance part. He will coach you on what you need, what documents you need, and how to prepare those documents. Is that correct, Rick?
Yes, thank you. And I put my email address on the bottom of the handout that everybody received. It's impact@impactstrategies.ca.
Okay. Rossana, there's another question. What type of organizations can pursue this funding?
Okay, again, any organization, anybody can present the information provided it meets with that criteria. Now, Vincent and I are talking about an education component. Now, again, one of the criteria that the funders need is they need to have some sort of return on investment. Okay, so there's got to be some ROI involved, some sort of a revenue stream. So if it's a hospital, there's revenue stream. If it's an education facility, that's one thing I'm going to leave to them. What I'll do is I'll take that information, Vincent, and we'll present it to the funders, and they'll come back and say yes or no. So that's done pretty quickly, but I would say any organization whatsoever that has a project that needs financing, you can present it, and hopefully within days we can give you a yes or a no. Given those present, what are their contacts with governments or profits? I'm not sure what you mean, but the key is, everybody has projects they want to do, but a lot of people will say, we're going to go ahead and we're going to raise money and we're going to go out and build these houses in this country. But if the government is not on side, and if you haven't taken the time to engage the government and get them, discuss with them what their expectations are, what your expectations are, then what happens is they become a thorn in your side. We've had tons of projects that have been started and stopped because of that.
Another question is, can the organization be for-profit and non-for-profit?
Good question, very good question. Nonprofit organizations, typically, some of the projects that I've looked at for nonprofit organizations have no revenue stream. It's just goodwill and humanitarian in nature. And that's always good. And these guys have funded some of those projects, but I leave that up to them. Again, it's best if we do the letter of request and the summary, executive summary, 1-2 page summary of the project. And I just present it to them and they'll go, doesn't fit, or, yes, let's look at this next year. They're prioritizing because they're trying to allocate the last 40 billion within, by sort of the end of Q2 next year.
There's another request is, Rossana, will you be willing to give this talk in Spanish? You're muted.
Sure, I can do it in Spanish, no problem.
Okay, we'll work on setting that up.
I can't, don't ask me.
Any other questions? We're about to hit the hour.
There's one in here that talks about setting up engineering colleges in countries, student fees and the source of revenue. Yeah, again, education is high. Education, medical, and environment and infrastructure development is high on these guys' list of priorities. Excuse me.
Rick, related to the credibility of the countries, is there a place to find out their standing, if it's a good standing or poor standing? I mean, who are what indicators do you use?
The financing group have a group of actuaries and research team, and what they do is they will go look at the recognized standing of that country, whether it be like A, B, C, D, and then they look at the political situation based on current news, long history, over the last year or two. So it's their risk mitigation. So that's their criteria, but typically within a day or two, they can give me a yes or a no. So it's before you spend a ton of time writing a whole bunch of stuff, etc. Let's do a letter of request. Let's do a summary, give it to them, and they'll go yes or no, and then we'll know. Kenya and Nigeria, yeah, they're actually looking at building an airport in Nigeria, so yes. And Kenya I believe is fine. South Africa, yes, they've already allocated next year several, believe it or not, tens of billions of dollars for a smart city, and they've already allocated a smart city up in Northern Africa.
Thank you. Any other questions before we close?
Yes, as an engineer, but again, you've got to. What I would suggest is if you've got a sustainable building that you're trying to do, it's a new building technology, let you and I talk offline and let me take a look at it. Because then what we can do is we can introduce that technology to countries that are looking to building homes. Like, as I say, Australia, they're looking at 50,000, Northern Ireland and Scotland, they're looking at tens of thousands of homes. So if you have technologies like that, I can help you.
Yeah. There's a question on what about the Argentina?
Yes, South America is fine. Again, I have a very good contact in Pakistan, so we put together a proposal for Pakistan. We presented it. They just happened to go through political turmoil the day we presented it, so that got shelved. But now they're back on. So again, things change. Colombia, I would suggest, again, let's do a letter of request and a summary, and they'll make the decision. Okay. I can't say off the top of my head it's their choice, but all I can do is present it very quickly.
Okay. There's a question whether you're working with the development banks in Africa or Asia.
The funders deal with top tier banks And what they're looking for is when they're dealing with a country, they're looking to make sure that that banking relationship in that country has good relationships with the top tier banks. Okay, I don't know if that answered. Yes, they are working with banks all over Africa. And somebody said non-debt funding would be appropriate to call this equity funding. Yeah, you could. They choose non-debt because they want countries to realize that this isn't going to impact their own ability to use their tax dollars to go out and develop things. Excuse me.
Okay. Well, we need to close this. I want to thank Rossana, Rick, great presentation. I want to thank everybody for participating. The recordings will be uploaded to the IFEES GDC page. We will have a follow-up collaborative on December 17th on energy. How do you assess your energy needs? It could be for a hospital, it could be for a school. How can you measure and determine what are your energy needs, especially now that things are a little bit chaotic because of vaccines and vaccination. But there's the website where all the recordings have been uploaded, which is the IFEES website. You can send me an email. There's my email if you want to find out more about the topic, or if you want me to connect you with the right people. There's information on Project Echo, also on the IFEES website, and the actual ECHO COVID-19 response, global response there's the link. The ECHO COVID response, I mean, they have just trained close to 1 million people around the world on COVID. So I want to thank everybody. Donna, thank you for putting this together. Thank you, Rossana. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, everybody. Please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ramiro. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Rosanna.
Thank you all. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.